At 6:48 p.m., Emma realized she wasn't alone in Pine Hollow Forest. An hour earlier, the boys had driven away. "You ruined our futures," one of them had said before the truck disappeared down the gravel road. They took her phone. They bound her wrists. They left her in a section of forest recently marked as a predator-active zone. Wolves had been sighted there. Temperatures were dropping fast. The sun was already bleeding out behind the trees. She freed her hands in 7 minutes. But freedom didn't mean safety. The forest had gone quiet in that unnatural way that makes your heart pound louder than the wind. Then the leaves shifted. Not in one place, in several. A shape stepped out from behind a pine tree. Then another, then more. 14 wild dogs emerged from the dark, moving slowly, deliberately, until they formed a wide circle around her. They didn't bark. They didn't attack. They just stood there. Then came a heavier sound from deeper in the woods. A gray wolf appeared 40 feet away, low and focused. The air changed. The pack leader, a large shepherd mix with a scar cutting across his left ear, stepped directly between Emma and the wolf. What happened next lasted seconds, and by 7:18 a.m., when search teams finally found her alive, those 14 dogs had vanished without a trace. But one trail camera image would raise a question no one could easily answer. Why did a missing shelter dog lead a wild pack and choose her? And what really happened in the dark before sunrise? Stay with us because this story will leave you speechless. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Lincoln High School sat at the eastern edge of Cedar Ridge, a town small enough that everyone knew your name and large enough that secrets still found places to hide. The hallways on state exam day. Emma sat in the third row, her pencil still, her eyes no longer on her own paper. She had noticed it 10 minutes into the exam. 2 boys at the back of the room, Tyler and Marcus, exchanging answers on folded slips of paper passed beneath desks with practiced ease. She told herself it wasn't her business. She told herself to look away. But the words wouldn't come, and neither would the courage to ignore what she was seeing. She pulled out her phone under the desk, hands trembling slightly, and pressed record. The footage was clear, deliberate, undeniable. For a long moment she sat with that video like it was a lit match in her palm. She thought about what would happen if she sent it. She thought about what would happen if she didn't. At 3:40 p.m. she sent it to Principal Hargrove without another second of hesitation. By 4:15, she was walking toward the parking lot, backpack on her shoulder, trying to convince herself the hard part was over. It wasn't. Tyler was leaning against her car. Marcus stood 3 feet to his left. Neither of them smiled. "We just want to talk," Tyler said, his voice carrying the particular calm of someone who had already decided how the conversation would end. Emma's grip tightened around her bag strap. She knew, even then, that the word talk meant something entirely different to them. She got into the truck because she believed it, because she was 16, and because refusing felt more dangerous in that moment than agreeing. The truck moved east, away from town, away from traffic, away from anyone who might notice. When it finally stopped at the tree line of Pine Hollow Forest, the light had already begun to fade. They took her phone first, then bound her wrists with a strip of zip tie from the bed of the truck. "You ruined our futures," Marcus said, and those 3 words carried a weight that made the air feel thinner. Then the engine turned over, gravel sprayed beneath the tires, and the truck was gone. Emma stood alone at the edge of the darkening forest, wrists bound, the sun sinking fast behind the trees. She worked her hands free over the next 7 minutes, the plastic cutting into her skin until it gave. But free hands didn't change the silence around her or the miles of dark forest ahead. The hard part, she now understood, had not even started. By 6:48 p.m., the light inside Pine Hollow had dropped to a deep, muted gray that made every shadow look like movement. Emma had been walking for 40 minutes, following no path, only the instinct to move rather than stand still. Her wrists were raw. Her shoes were wrong for this terrain. Flat, soled sneakers that slipped on the wet undergrowth with every step. The forest held sounds she couldn't identify, something rustling far to the left, a branch snapping somewhere above her, the low, continuous whisper of wind pressing through the pines. She kept moving. Then the leaves shifted ahead of her and she stopped. It wasn't the wind. The sound came from too many directions at once, a slow encircling rustle that moved with deliberate coordination. Emma pressed her back against the nearest tree, heart hammering, eyes scanning the darkening spaces between the trunks. The first dog appeared from the left, a large, rough, coated animal that paused at the edge of the clearing and looked at her without blinking. Then a second from the right. Then 3 more, emerging from the brush in near silence, their movements unhurried, their eyes steady. By the time the last one stepped into view, she had counted 14. They arranged themselves in a wide arc around her, not charging, not growling, simply present, like a wall that had decided to form itself out of instinct. Emma didn't move. Fear had locked every muscle in her body, and her breath came in shallow, silent pulls. She pressed harder against the tree as if she could disappear into the bark. Then a different sound came from deeper in the woods. Heavier. Singular. A large gray wolf materialized from the darkness roughly 40 feet ahead, its eyes catching the last pale light and holding it. It was still for only a second before its posture dropped into something low and deliberate, the kind of stillness that precedes movement. Then the pack leader stepped forward. Emma recognized the dog by his size first, a broad-shouldered shepherd mix with a crooked scar running across his left ear. He placed himself directly between Emma and the wolf, and what happened next lasted no more than 30 seconds but felt much longer. The wolf lunged. The pack moved as one. Bodies collided in a burst of snarling chaos that erupted and then fell apart just as quickly. Snow and dead leaves exploded upward. The sound of it cut through the air like something tearing. Then the wolf was gone, retreating back into the dark without a sound, as though the forest itself had simply swallowed it. Emma stood shaking, her back still pressed to the tree. The pack settled around her again, breathing hard, their eyes turned outward. The leader stood closest, his wounded side heaving with effort, a thin line of blood darkening the fur along his ribs. He did not retreat. He did not lie down. He simply stood, facing the direction the wolf had gone, and held his post as if the possibility of retreat had never once crossed his mind. The memory arrived without warning, the way important things often do. Emma was sitting with her back against the base of a pine tree, her knees drawn to her chest, the pack arranged loosely around her in the dark. She was exhausted and cold and still trembling in the slow, involuntary way the body continues shaking even after danger passes. She was staring at the leader, at the way he moved when he turned, at the crooked line of scar tissue cutting across his left ear, and then the memory came back so hard and so suddenly that her breath caught in her throat. A March of the previous year, a Saturday morning. She had gone to the Cedar Ridge Animal Shelter with her mother, not to adopt, just to walk the dogs, just to be useful for a few hours. Most of the dogs had pressed eagerly against the kennel doors, barking and jumping, desperate for any attention. One had not. A shepherd mix in the second-to-last kennel, sitting very still in the back corner, watching her through the chain, Link with eyes that were brown and unreadable, and somehow calm in a way that felt entirely unlike any shelter dog she had ever seen. His name tag read Scout. The volunteer had explained with a quiet apology in her voice that Scout had been there for 11 weeks and trusted almost no one. But when Emma crouched at the kennel door and extended her hand, the dog had walked forward without hesitation and pressed his nose against her fingers. The volunteer had looked genuinely surprised. "He's never done that," she said. Emma had visited 4 more times after that. Then in August, a storm had torn through the shelter property and damaged a section of fencing along the back run, and Scout had gone. The shelter declared him lost. Emma had posted flyers for 2 weeks, and then school started and time moved the way time does, and she told herself he had probably found somewhere safe. She had almost believed it. Now she sat in Pine Hollow Forest in the dark, shaking and bleeding slightly at the wrists, and the dog, who had once pressed his nose against her fingers through chain, Link, was standing 5 feet away, holding guard over her as if no time had passed at all. She whispered his name once, barely a sound. His ear turned toward her, the scarred one. He didn't approach, but his posture shifted in a way she recognized, a slight easing of the shoulders, a breath released. The pack kept their circle through the night. Emma drifted in and out of a shallow, exhausted sleep, waking each time to find them still there, steady and silent in the cold. At 7:18 in the morning, the sound of a helicopter cut through the trees and voices carried from the eastern trail. Flashlight beams swept across the undergrowth. Before the first officer reached the clearing, the pack was gone, dissolving back into the forest without a sound, as quietly as they had first appeared. Emma was found sitting upright against the tree, cold and dehydrated but alive. When the deputy asked what had kept her safe through the night, she looked at the tree line for a long moment before answering. "I thought I was alone," she said quietly. The deputy waited. "I wasn't," she said. The interrogation room at Cedar Ridge Sheriff's Department was small and lit with fluorescent light that made every surface look slightly wrong, too bright, too flat, too unforgiving. Emma sat beside her mother and a family attorney as investigators walked her through the previous 24 hours with steady, methodical patience. She answered everything. She described the parking lot, the truck, the zip tie, the words Marcus had spoken before the door closed. Across the building, Tyler and Marcus sat in separate rooms with their own parents, using the word prank with the confidence of boys who had never once been told that the world would not accept that explanation. The evidence did not agree. Gas station security footage from a station on Route 9 showed the truck heading east at 5:12 p.m., with Emma visible in the back seat and a timestamp that matched her account precisely. A deputy had run the plates before the sun came up. By afternoon, investigators had recovered deleted text messages from both phones, messages that had been exchanged in the 3 hours between Emma sending the video and Tyler approaching her in the parking lot. The language in those messages was specific enough that the county prosecutor upgraded the charge before the end of the first day. What had been filed initially as unlawful restraint became kidnapping, aggravated by the use of a vehicle to transport a minor across county lines. A wildlife officer from the State Parks Division was brought in to review the area where Emma had been found. Pine Hollow's eastern sector had been flagged in an internal report 6 weeks earlier as a predator active zone, following confirmed wolf sightings and territorial marking. The officer confirmed in plain language that leaving an untrained minor in that section of forest after dark, without equipment, in winter temperatures, represented a life-threatening situation by any standard of assessment. The parents of both boys went quiet when that report was read aloud. The word prank stopped appearing in any of the statements that followed. By the second day, local media had picked up the story, and the town of Cedar Ridge began the uncomfortable process of deciding what it thought. Some people defended Tyler and Marcus in the way that small communities sometimes defend their own, arguing that the boys had made a mistake, that they were young, that their athletic futures shouldn't be destroyed over one bad decision. Others pointed to the wildlife report and the deleted texts and said plainly that the word mistake did not cover what had been done. The conversation divided the town along lines that had always existed but rarely surfaced this clearly. While Cedar Ridge argued, investigators were quietly running a separate thread of the case. The shepherd mix who had stayed close to Emma through the night had been captured on a trail camera mounted near the eastern access point at 6:22 a.m., approximately 40 minutes before the search team arrived. The image was clear enough to show the scar on the left ear. A technician cross referenced the description against lost and stray animal records. The shelter microchip database returned a single match. The dog's registered name was Scout. His last known address was the Cedar Ridge Animal Shelter. The revelation moved through the department, and then through the press, with the speed of something that the public had already been waiting to feel. A town that had been arguing about culpability stopped briefly to absorb the image of a dog who had escaped a storm-damaged shelter, built a pack, survived a winter in the wild, and then placed himself between a 16-year-old girl and a wolf in a forest that most adults would not enter alone after dark. The public reaction was not quiet. The interrogation room at Cedar Ridge Sheriff's Department was small and lit with fluorescent light that made every surface look slightly wrong, too bright, too flat, too unforgiving. Emma sat beside her mother and a family attorney as investigators walked her through the previous 24 hours with steady, methodical patience. She answered everything. She described the parking lot, the truck, the zip tie, the words Marcus had spoken before the door closed. Across the building, Tyler and Marcus sat in separate rooms with their own parents, using the word prank with the confidence of boys who had never once been told that the world would not accept that explanation. The evidence did not agree. Gas station security footage from a station on Route 9 showed the truck heading east at 5:12 p.m., with Emma visible in the back seat and a timestamp that matched her account precisely. A deputy had run the plates before the sun came up. By afternoon, investigators had recovered deleted text messages from both phones, messages that had been exchanged in the 3 hours between Emma sending the video and Tyler approaching her in the parking lot. The language in those messages was specific enough that the county prosecutor upgraded the charge before the end of the first day. What had been filed initially as unlawful restraint became kidnapping, aggravated by the use of a vehicle to transport a minor across county lines. A wildlife officer from the State Parks Division was brought in to review the area where Emma had been found. Pine Hollow's eastern sector had been flagged in an internal report 6 weeks earlier as a predator active zone, following confirmed wolf sightings and territorial marking. The officer confirmed in plain language that leaving an untrained minor in that section of forest after dark, without equipment, in winter temperatures, represented a life-threatening situation by any standard of assessment. The parents of both boys went quiet when that report was read aloud. The word prank stopped appearing in any of the statements that followed. By the second day, local media had picked up the story, and the town of Cedar Ridge began the uncomfortable process of deciding what it thought. Some people defended Tyler and Marcus in the way that small communities sometimes defend their own, arguing that the boys had made a mistake, that they were young, that their athletic futures shouldn't be destroyed over one bad decision. Others pointed to the wildlife report and the deleted texts and said plainly that the word mistake did not cover what had been done. The conversation divided the town along lines that had always existed but rarely surfaced this clearly. While Cedar Ridge argued, investigators were quietly running a separate thread of the case. The shepherd Mix, who had stayed close to Emma through the night, had been captured on a trail camera mounted near the eastern access point at 6:22 a.m., approximately 40 minutes before the search team arrived. The image was clear enough to show the scar on the left ear. A technician cross-referenced the description against lost and stray animal records. The shelter microchip database returned a single match. The dog's registered name was Scout. His last known address was the Cedar Ridge Animal Shelter. The revelation moved through the department, and then through the press, with the speed of something that the public had already been waiting to feel. A town that had been arguing about culpability stopped briefly to absorb the image of a dog who had escaped a storm-damaged shelter, built a pack, survived a winter in the wild, and then placed himself between a 16-year-old girl and a wolf in a forest that most adults would not enter alone after dark. The public reaction was not quiet. The apology came from the place she least expected. It arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in a certified envelope, its edges slightly bent as if it had traveled a long and uncertain distance. Emma stared at her name printed neatly across the front and felt her pulse shift. Most mail these days came from reporters, legal offices, or school administrators. She almost set it aside. But something about the unfamiliar handwriting in the return address made her open it slowly at the kitchen table. Inside was a folded letter written in careful blue ink. It began without excuses. "Emma, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know I understand what I did." The signature at the bottom read Ryan. Her fingers tightened around the paper. She read the first paragraph once, then again. He described the exam day, the pressure, the panic, the decision to cheat. When she recorded them and sent the video at 30:40 p.m., he wrote that fear took over. "We thought if we scared you, you'd stay quiet," he admitted. "I didn't think about what the forest would feel like for you. I didn't think about what leaving you there meant." The words were not dramatic. There were no grand declarations. Just short, direct sentences. "When we drove away, I knew it wasn't a joke anymore. I knew it was wrong. I didn't stop it." Anger rose first, hot and familiar. Therapy had not erased the memory of cold dirt against her wrists. Loud sounds still made her shoulders tense. Some nights she still woke up breathless. Reading his words reopened a door she had worked hard to close. She folded the letter once, then unfolded it again. Guilt admission did not erase harm. She knew that. But something in the tone felt different from courtroom statements. It felt unfiltered. Weeks later, her counselor mentioned that Ryan had requested placement in the Juvenile Animal Rehabilitation Unit while in detention. At first Emma dismissed it as strategy, but reports showed he volunteered for early shifts. He cleaned cages. He assisted with injured wildlife intake. He accepted restrictions without complaint. Hasn't asked for special treatment, the counselor told her. He asked to do work that matters. Emma didn't respond immediately. She went home and read the letter again. On September 2, a review hearing was scheduled to evaluate probation conditions. The courtroom felt smaller than before, fewer reporters, less tension. Ryan stood straighter this time, though he did not look toward her. When the judge invited additional statements, Emma felt her heartbeat steady instead of spike. She walked to the front without notes. The room waited. "I'm not here to erase what happened," she said calmly. "And I'm not here to pretend it didn't change me." Her voice did not shake. But if change is real, it should count. Only if it continues. She did not offer forgiveness. She did not offer anger. She offered accountability. The judge studied her for several long seconds before nodding. Structured probation was approved. Mandatory rehabilitation work. Continued counseling. Strict monitoring. The decision balanced consequence with opportunity. Outside the courthouse, microphones waited again, but Emma walked past them. She did not want headlines about mercy. That evening she stood alone in her backyard, looking up at the clear sky. The same sky she had stared at through branches that night in Pine Hollow. Back then it felt distant and unreachable. Now it felt steady. She realized something important. Choosing mercy did not mean forgetting. It did not mean excusing fear or minimizing trauma. It meant refusing to let bitterness shape the rest of her life. Her phone buzzed later with a message from her therapist. "How do you feel?" Emma typed back slowly. "Lighter. Not because it's over, but because I didn't let it harden me." She put the phone away and closed her eyes for a moment, breathing evenly. Healing was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was a series of decisions made quietly, often without applause. Inside, her mother asked gently if she was okay. Emma nodded. "I think so," she said. And for the first time since the forest, she believed it. She went back not because she had to, but because she chose to on October 14. The morning air carried the first real bite of autumn when Emma turned her car onto the narrow road leading toward Pine Hollow. The trees stood tall and unchanged, their shadows stretching across the pavement like silent witnesses. Her hands remained steady on the steering wheel, though her pulse ticked slightly faster than usual. She had rehearsed this drive in her mind for weeks. In therapy, she had described the road, the curve near the ranger sign, the exact place where the gravel shifts beneath tires. Now it was real again, unfolding in front of her. She parked near the same trail marker where officers had once gathered. For a moment, she stayed inside the car, listening to the engine settle into silence. The forest looked ordinary in daylight. No flashing lights, no shouting, just wind moving through branches. She stepped out, carrying a small container of water and sealed packets of meat recommended by a wildlife officer. The ground felt firm beneath her shoes. She walked carefully but not hesitantly, counting her breaths the way she had practiced. Inhale 4. Hold exhale 4. At the clearing's edge, she placed the supplies on a flat patch of ground and stepped back several feet. Her heartbeat was noticeable now, but not overwhelming. She scanned the tree line without straining. For nearly a minute, nothing moved. Then a faint rustle broke the stillness. A shape shifted between two trunks. Then another. The pack emerged gradually, alert but controlled. They did not charge, they did not retreat. They simply observed. Scout stepped forward last. The scar along his ear confirmed what her memory already knew. He looked leaner than she remembered, stronger in a way that came from surviving on instinct. Their eyes met across the open space. Emma felt her throat tighten, but she didn't move closer. She allowed him to decide the distance. He approached a few steps, lowering his head briefly to inspect the supplies before lifting his gaze back to her. Suddenly, a sharp cracking sound echoed from deeper in the woods. It was loud enough to snap her body into stillness. Every muscle locked. Her breath stopped mid-inhale. For one suspended second, she was no longer standing in daylight. She was back on cold ground with her wrists bound. Her vision narrowed. The pack reacted instantly, heads turning toward the source of the noise. Emma forced herself to focus. She counted silently. 1, 2, 3. She inhaled slowly through her nose and released the air with control. "It's okay," she said quietly. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "It's just a branch." She wasn't certain, but she chose the explanation deliberately. Scout's ears flicked. He watched her carefully, as if measuring her reaction more than the sound itself. After several seconds he shifted his stance. The tension in his posture eased slightly. He gave a small, decisive turn of his head toward the trees. The rest of the pack responded immediately, stepping back into formation. No chaos, no panic, just coordinated movement. Scout lingered one moment longer, holding her gaze. There was no dramatic gesture, no rush of affection. Just recognition and acknowledgement. Emma felt something settle inside her chest. The forest had not swallowed her. It had not claimed her as a memory frozen in fear. It remained what it always was, a place with risk, yes, but also life moving forward. She gave a small nod, more to herself than to him. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if the words were for Scout or for her own courage. Gradually, the pack retreated deeper into the trees until their shapes blended into shadow. Emma waited another minute before walking back toward her car. Her steps felt measured, grounded. When she reached the door, she paused and looked once more at the clearing. Her heart was still beating faster than normal, but it wasn't racing out of control. Inside the car, she exhaled fully and allowed a small, steady smile to form. The forest no longer felt like the place where she was abandoned. It felt like a place she had returned to on her own terms. As she drove away, sunlight filtered through the branches overhead, flickering across the windshield. "I feel less like a victim," she said quietly, testing the truth of it. The words did not feel forced, they felt earned. This time, the guardian was the one bleeding. On November 22, just after sunrise, Emma received a call from a regional wildlife ranger who recognized her name immediately. A shepherd mix matching Scout's description had been located near the north ridge of Pine Hollow, caught in an illegal steel trap likely set for larger game. The ranger's voice remained professional, but there was urgency beneath it. "The pack hasn't left him," he explained. "They're circling. Defensive. We can't approach safely." Emma didn't hesitate. She asked only one question. "Is he alive?" When the ranger confirmed he was, she grabbed her coat and drove out. The forest looked colder than she remembered. Frost clung to low branches, and the air felt thin with early winter pressure. Officials waited at a controlled distance, keeping visual contact through binoculars. When Emma stepped closer under their supervision, she saw them first, the pack, positioned in a wide protective ring. Low growls vibrated through the clearing, not aggressive without reason, but firm. At the center lay Scout. One hind leg was caught in the trap, metal teeth locked around muscle. Blood stained the snow beneath him in dark patches that made Emma's chest tighten. She moved slowly, hands visible, as instructed. "It's me," she called gently, her voice steady but strong enough to carry. The pack's attention shifted toward her. A few took cautious steps forward, bodies rigid. Scout lifted his head with visible effort. His breathing was shallow but controlled. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Emma stopped several feet away and lowered herself slightly to reduce her height. "I'm not here to hurt you," she continued calmly. The tension stretched for several long seconds. Then something shifted. Scout gave a faint, deliberate movement of his head. It wasn't dramatic, but it was clear. The pack eased their formation just enough to allow her closer without abandoning their guard. The ranger team prepared the tranquilizer only when Emma was within a safe range. She kept speaking the entire time, maintaining eye contact until the dart was administered cleanly into his shoulder. Scout's body resisted at first, muscles tight, then gradually relaxed as the medication took effect. Wildlife officers moved quickly to secure the trap and control bleeding. The steel jaws were pried open carefully, revealing deep puncture wounds, but no visible bone fracture. "He's strong," one of the veterinarians said once Scout was loaded for transport. "If there's no infection, he has a real chance." Emma followed the transport vehicle to the rehabilitation center, her mind focused and practical. Fear was present, but it did not overwhelm her. At the clinic, scans confirmed severe soft tissue damage but no shattered bone. The leg would require careful stabilization and weeks of monitoring. As the veterinary team cleaned and examined him further, older scars became visible along his shoulders and flank, clean lines from healed injuries, evidence of past fights, evidence of leadership defended. The staff exchanged looks that confirmed what Emma already knew. Scout wasn't just part of the pack. He led it. On December 3, she returned for a scheduled rehabilitation visit. Scout stood inside a secured recovery enclosure, weight partially supported but steady. His eyes tracked her immediately when she approached the barrier. There was no confusion in his expression, only alert awareness. Emma placed her hand gently against the fence. "You stood for me," she said quietly. "Now I stand for you." Her voice didn't break. The lead veterinarian briefed her on progress. Healing was consistent, infection risk had decreased. Controlled movement exercises had begun. The goal was eventual release if mobility returned fully. Emma listened carefully, asking practical questions rather than emotional ones. She understood that recovery required patience, not attachment. Before leaving, she looked at Scout one more time. His posture, even injured, carried presence. He was not defeated. He was waiting. Emma stepped back from the enclosure with a clear understanding. Strength was not just surviving attack. It was recovering after. As she walked toward the exit, she felt the same quiet resolve she had discovered in herself months earlier. Protection did not always mean fighting. Sometimes it meant showing up when the strongest among you needed help most. Love isn't keeping something safe. Sometimes it's setting it free. By January 14, the Wildlife Rehabilitation Board scheduled Scout's final evaluation. Emma arrived early, sitting in a modest conference room, while specialists reviewed mobility reports, behavioral observations, and reintegration data collected over several weeks. Scout's leg had healed well. Muscle strength had returned through controlled therapy. There was only minor stiffness during sharp turns, nothing that would prevent survival. The lead wildlife biologist explained the larger concern carefully. "Extended containment changes pack dynamics," he said. "If he remains separated too long, leadership can shift permanently. Reintroduction timing matters." Emma listened without interrupting. She understood the subtext. Keeping him safe inside fencing might protect his body, but it could cost him his place in the wild. The board members discussed territory stability and winter migration patterns. Reports indicated the pack had maintained a loose perimeter near the North Ridge, likely waiting but gradually adapting. "He belongs with them," one ranger concluded. "If he's going back, it should be now." The decision was unanimous. Release was approved for that afternoon under monitored conditions. Emma felt a tightening in her chest that had nothing to do with doubt. It was attachment, and she recognized it clearly. The release site was chosen near the same clearing where she had first returned in October. Snow covered the ground in a clean, unbroken layer. The sky hung pale and still. A transport crate was positioned facing the tree line to reduce stress and allow immediate orientation. Emma stood a few steps back as officials prepared the latch. Her gloves pressed firmly against her palms. This moment felt different from every other encounter. This time she would not follow. She would not wait nearby. When the crate door opened, Scout did not bolt. He stepped forward cautiously, testing his repaired leg against the snow. His movements were steady, controlled. He paused just outside the crate and turned his head slightly toward Emma. The distance between them held weight. No barrier, no fence, just open air and choice. For several long seconds, neither moved. She saw recognition in his eyes, the same awareness that had held her steady in the forest months ago. "You don't belong behind fences," she said quietly, her voice even. There were no tears, no dramatic farewell, just truth. She understood now that loving something wild required respecting its nature. Scout blinked once, then shifted his gaze toward the trees. A faint movement appeared beyond the first line of trunks. Then another. The pack emerged gradually, forming a loose semicircle. They did not rush him. They waited. Scout took one deliberate step forward, then another. His gait held strength. When he reached the pack's edge, two wolves moved alongside him, brushing shoulders briefly before aligning formation. There was no chaos, no struggle for position. The hierarchy adjusted smoothly, as if it had simply paused and now resumed. Within moments, they turned as one and began moving toward the deeper forest. Emma remained still until their shapes blended into shadow. The clearing grew quiet again, empty except for faint tracks pressed into fresh snow. A ranger approached gently. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded once. "Yes," she answered honestly. The ache in her chest was present, but it did not feel like loss. It felt like completion. As she walked back toward her car, she reflected on how easily attachment can disguise itself as protection. Months ago, she had needed rescue. Scout had led help to her. Later, she had stood for him when he was injured. Now the balance was restored. Each had returned the other to where they belonged. She started the engine and allowed herself one final glance at the tree line. Love, she realized, was not possession. It was respect for freedom. And choosing that freedom, even when it hurt slightly, felt stronger than holding on out of fear. 1 year later, she stood in daylight, no longer afraid. On May 12, 2026, the auditorium at Lincoln High filled with the restless energy of graduation morning. Families adjusted cameras, teachers straightened programs. The stage lights cast a steady glow across rows of folding chairs where seniors waited for their names to be called. Emma sat near the center, cap resting securely, gown pressed neatly. There had been a time when walking across any public stage felt impossible. Now her breathing was even. When the principal stepped to the podium and announced the Student Integrity Award, a brief pause followed before her name echoed through the speakers. Emma Carter. The applause started softly, then grew stronger as students and parents recognized what the award represented. She rose without hesitation and crossed the stage with measured steps. No flashbacks, no shaking hands. She accepted the certificate, shook hands, and turned toward the audience. Her parents stood immediately. So did several teachers. The sound of clapping filled the room fully this time. Later in the ceremony, selected students were invited to speak. Emma had declined prepared notes. When her turn came, she approached the microphone calmly. The auditorium quieted in anticipation, not of drama, but of meaning. She looked across the rows of faces, many of whom had followed her story over the past year. People ask what courage looks like, she began. Her voice carried clearly without strain. Sometimes it looks like standing alone, but more often, it looks like who you become after. The room remained silent, attentive. "I didn't choose what happened," she continued. "But I chose what I did next. And every one of us will face a moment where we have to decide that." She did not mention the forest by name. She did not describe the cold or the fear. She didn't need to. The strength in her posture said enough. When she finished, the applause rose slowly into a standing ovation that lasted longer than expected. She stepped away from the microphone with steady composure. After the ceremony, reporters waited near the entrance again, though far fewer than months earlier. This time she stopped briefly. "What's next for you?" one asked. Emma answered without rehearsing. "I've been accepted into the State University Wildlife Behavioral Science program," she said. "I want to study animal behavior and rehabilitation." The connection felt natural, not symbolic. The forest had once represented fear. Now it represented understanding. That afternoon, her family drove home along the highway that curved near Pine Hollow. The trees stood tall against the early summer sky. As they passed the familiar stretch of road, Emma turned her head slightly toward the tree line. For a brief second, she thought she noticed subtle movement between the trunks. It could have been wind. It could have been wildlife shifting unseen. She didn't ask the car to stop. She didn't need confirmation. Her mother glanced at her gently. "You okay?" she asked. Emma nodded. "Yeah," she replied, and this time the word carried certainty. The forest no longer held her as a memory of abandonment. It stood simply as a place she had walked through and survived. That evening, she placed her graduation certificate on her desk beside her university acceptance letter. The room felt ordinary, familiar, safe. She sat on the edge of her bed and allowed herself to reflect on the year that had reshaped everything. She had been left in the woods. She had faced predators, human and wild. She had chosen accountability over silence, mercy over bitterness, freedom over possession. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said quietly to herself. And she realized it was true. The forest had once marked the moment her world fractured. Now it marked the beginning of who she had become. Not a headline, not a victim, not a cautionary tale. Just a young woman who walked through the darkest place she knew, and came out stronger on the other side.